And Zach Tao did not play more in that one game where they got in with 0.2 of a second. And she also asked about the analytics of the coaches about when they decide on that sort of thing. Her question had more to do with when they're up by 30. Why doesn't he put more of the scrubs in? Or the walk-ons in? One of the things that I've noticed is, or I've heard Mark talk about, is that he has a metric for how long a player stays at peak capacity while he's in the game, and when that starts to tail off, they take him out of the game. My question with that is kind of along the same line of questions. I've heard also some fans complain about Mark's substitution patterns, why that sometimes in games they get off to a good start, but through the midway part of the first half, they kind of tail off and the other team comes back on them in the first half. What do you think about his substitution patterns? Have you had any problem with the way he's been using his rotations this year?
Well, to go to the initial question about the walk-ons, I feel bad for them sometimes. Would like to see them get a little more run, but I think the coaches, I think they feel like they have, a finite number of game minutes available, and they're usually going to use those for players that they're trying to develop. Like the freshmen. When this team was healthy, Travis Perry and Trent Noah weren't getting a lot of run. And so when you have kind of mop-up minutes, I think they're probably going to use those on the scholarship players to develop them. To the overall substitution patterns, if you go back and look at Mark Pope at BYU, he basically prefers to play 10 players. And I've heard him say that, they want to play at such a pace that, they feel like, they need to run in fresh troops to be able to stay at that pace. I guess I don't know if it's a criticism, but I guess my observation of the substitutions this year, I think sometimes it seems like they're not mindful of the combinations they're going to have on the floor. I think especially after the injuries set in, you weren't 9 deep with veteran players. I think sometimes they need to be a little more conscious of who they have on the court together.
Yeah. I do think, like you said, and he said that early on, he's going to play. I think our colleague Ben Roberts asked Mark early in the season, as the season goes along, where you do, John Calipari wanted to kind of whittle it down to 7 or 8 guys by the time he got to the end of the season in tournament time. Would you do a similar thing? And Mark basically said, no, he didn't think he would. He would play as you said, Mark, about, the style of play and that sort of thing. And then I'm not sure, as you mentioned, with all the injuries, that this year is the definitive case of how we're always going to see Mark substitute. But I feel the same. Back to the initial question, I feel the same way. I feel sorry sometimes and wonder sometimes why the walk-ons don't get more playing time or why they don't get in sooner. But as you mentioned, there's a finite number of minutes. Also, with all the injuries he's had, he's trying to give guys, the freshmen, Colin Chandler, Ansley Almanor, people like that who maybe wouldn't get quite as much playing time. He knows he's going to need them, or he wants them to get more experience, so they're going to play more. I don't really have a big problem with the way Mark is substituted. We had another question about: do you think Kentucky will be in the same bracket as Louisville, Arkansas?